Kevin Wright hadn't thought about his ex-wife in months. Well, that was a lie. He thought about her all the time, but he'd gotten better at pushing those thoughts away. 4 years was enough time to move on, wasn't it? Enough time to forget how her laugh used to fill their apartment, or how she'd dance in the kitchen while making breakfast, or how safe he felt with her head on his chest at night. But Kevin was good at lying to himself. It was a skill he'd perfected over 38 years of life. Tell yourself something enough times, and eventually it starts to feel true. So he told himself he was over Tasha. He told himself the divorce was for the best. He told himself that building his real estate empire was enough to fill the emptiness in his chest. His office on the 42nd floor had views of the entire city. Floor-to-ceiling windows that cost more than most people's houses. A desk made from reclaimed wood that some designer insisted was essential. Art on the walls that he didn't understand but knew was expensive. Everything in that office screamed success. Everything except Kevin himself. He sat in his leather chair staring at a property report without really seeing it. His assistant had been trying to get him to visit some farm he'd bought upstate for months now. 6 months, actually. He kept putting it off because, honestly, what did he know about farms? He was a city guy. Always had been. He bought the property as part of a larger deal, barely glancing at the details. Some organic farm with a cottage and 70 acres. The plan was simple: tear it all down and build a luxury resort. People with money loved that whole countryside retreat thing. But his property manager kept insisting he see it in person before they started demolition. Something about understanding the land, seeing the potential. The usual stuff these guys say when they want to justify their fees. Kevin finally agreed, mostly because he had a meeting fall through and found himself with an empty Thursday afternoon. The drive upstate took 2 hours. Kevin spent most of it on conference calls, barely noticing the landscape changing from concrete to green. When his GPS finally announced he'd arrived, he looked up from his laptop and actually paid attention for the first time. The farm was beautiful. He hadn't expected that. Rolling fields dotted with neat rows of vegetables, a red barn that looked freshly painted, fruit trees heavy with apples, chickens wandering around a fenced area. It looked like something from a magazine about country living, the kind of place people fantasized about while stuck in traffic. Kevin parked his BMW near the barn and got out, immediately regretting his choice of Italian leather shoes. The ground was soft from recent rain. Great, these shoes cost $1,500. But he was here now, so he might as well look around. His property manager had mentioned a tenant family living in the cottage. Something about an agreement from the previous owner that he'd honored when he bought the place. Kevin vaguely remembered signing off on that, but he signed so many documents that they all blurred together. He figured he'd let them stay until the development started, then offer them a decent relocation package. Simple. Clean. Business. He walked along a dirt path between the vegetable gardens, breathing in air that smelled like earth and growing things. It was quiet here. Really quiet. No sirens, no traffic, no construction noise. Just birds and wind and the distant sound of chickens. Kevin couldn't remember the last time he'd experienced quiet like this. Probably not since before the divorce. That's when he saw her. A woman was working in the garden about 50 yards away, bent over a row of tomato plants. She wore faded jeans and a blue tank top, her hair pulled back in a ponytail. 3 small children played nearby in the dirt, laughing and chattering to each other. They looked about 3 or 4 years old, covered in mud and completely happy about it. Something about the woman's posture seemed familiar. The way she moved. The tilt of her head. Kevin's heart started beating faster without permission. No, it couldn't be. What were the odds? The woman stood up, arching her back like it was sore from bending. She turned to check on the children, and Kevin's entire world stopped moving. Tasha, his ex-wife, here, on his property, in the middle of nowhere, upstate New York. 4 years after she'd walked out of his life without a real explanation. Kevin couldn't move. Couldn't breathe. Couldn't think. He just stood there on the path, staring at the woman he'd married 7 years ago. The woman he'd loved more than he knew how to say. The woman who'd left him with nothing but divorce papers and a hole in his chest. But Tasha wasn't looking at him. She was looking at the children, smiling at something one of them said. And that's when Kevin's brain caught up with his eyes. 3 children, playing together, moving with that weird identical coordination that twins have. Triplets. Kevin's legs felt weak. He took a step closer, then another, drawn forward by something he couldn't name. The children were laughing now, building something with sticks and mud. Their faces were turned away from him, but something about them made his chest tight. One of the boys looked up, noticing Kevin for the first time. The child's face was streaked with dirt, but his eyes were clear and curious. Kevin felt like he'd been punched. Those eyes. He knew those eyes. He'd seen them in the mirror every morning for 38 years. The boy had his eyes. His exact eyes. Kevin's gaze snapped to the other two children. A girl and another boy, both now looking at the strange man standing on the path. They all had the same eyes. The same nose. The same shape to their faces. Kevin's hands started shaking. He looked at photos of himself as a child every time he visited his mother. These children could have been in those frames. Tasha must have sensed something because she turned around fast. When she saw Kevin standing there, every bit of color drained from her face. For a moment, they just stared at each other across 30 feet of farmland. 4 years of silence hung between them like a wall. "Kevin," Tasha whispered, but he could hear her clearly in the quiet. She looked terrified. Not surprised, terrified, which meant she'd known. She'd known this was his property. She'd known who owned the land she was living on, and she'd stayed anyway. Kevin tried to form words, but his brain was too busy doing math. The divorce was final 4 years ago. The children looked about 3, maybe 3.5, which meant Tasha had been pregnant when she left. Pregnant with triplets. His triplets. And she never told him. "Mama?" the little girl called out. "Who's that man?" Tasha moved fast then, walking quickly to the children and ushering them toward the cottage. She said something quiet to them that Kevin couldn't hear. A teenage girl appeared from behind the barn, and Tasha asked her to take the children inside. The kids protested, but Tasha's voice was firm. They went, though all 3 kept looking back at Kevin with curious eyes. His eyes. When the children disappeared into the cottage, Tasha turned back to face him. She crossed her arms over her chest, her chin raised in that defiant way Kevin remembered from their worst fights. She was ready for battle. But Kevin saw her hands gripping her arms too tight, saw the slight tremor in her shoulders. She wasn't just ready for battle. She was scared. "What are you doing here?" Tasha asked. Her voice was steady, but Kevin heard the shake underneath. "What am I doing here?" Kevin's voice came out louder than he intended. "This is my property, Tasha. I bought it 6 months ago. The question is, what are you doing here?" Tasha's jaw tightened. "I live here. I'm the tenant farmer. I've been here for almost 4 years. 4 years. Almost exactly as long as they'd been divorced." Kevin felt dizzy. This couldn't be happening. This couldn't be real. His ex-wife living on his property, raising children who looked exactly like him, children she'd never mentioned, children she'd hidden from him. "Those kids," Kevin said, his voice rough. "How old are they?" 3.5, Tasha said quietly. "Are they mine?" The question hung in the air. Tasha's eyes filled with something that looked like pain. Or maybe anger. Or maybe both. She was quiet for so long that Kevin thought she might not answer. Then she said just one word. "Yes." That one word hit Kevin harder than any punch. His knees actually buckled slightly. He had children. 3 children. 3.5 years old. And he'd never known, never held them as babies. Never heard their first words. Never saw their first steps. 36 months of their lives gone, stolen. Why? Kevin's voice cracked. "Why didn't you tell me?" Tasha laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Tell you? I tried to tell you, Kevin. I called your office 12 times. Your assistant said you left instructions not to put me through. I sent emails. They bounced back. I went to your apartment building. The doorman turned me away. You erased me from your life so completely that I couldn't reach you if the building was on fire." Kevin remembered giving those instructions, remembered the hurt and anger that made him want to cut Tasha out completely. But he'd never imagined she might need to tell him something important. Never thought she might be carrying his children. "I was upset," Kevin said weakly, "after you left without explaining why." "Without explaining?" Tasha's voice rose. "I told you why, Kevin. I told you 100 times. I couldn't stay in a marriage where your family treated me like dirt and you just let it happen. Where your mother called me every name except the one my parents gave me. Where I had to smile through dinner while she asked when I'd get a real job and stop embarrassing the family. Where you just sat there and said nothing. Kevin wanted to deny it, but he couldn't. Every word was true. His mother had been horrible to Tasha from day one, and Kevin had been too much of a coward to stand up to her. He'd told himself he was keeping peace, told himself his mother would come around eventually, told himself Tasha was being too sensitive. All lies he'd believed, because admitting the truth meant admitting he'd failed his wife. "I'm sorry," Kevin said. "I should have defended you. I should have chosen you over my mother's approval. But that doesn't excuse keeping my children from me." "I didn't keep them from you," Tasha shot back. "You made yourself unreachable. And then I was pregnant with triplets, high risk, working 2 jobs just to pay for doctor visits. I didn't have energy to track you down when you'd made it clear you wanted nothing to do with me. I would have wanted to know about my children. Would you have? Or would you have tried to take them from me? Get custody because you have money and lawyers and I was a struggling single mother? Tell me honestly, Kevin, what would you have done?" Kevin opened his mouth to argue, but stopped. What would he have done? 4 years ago, hurt and angry, he probably would have fought for custody. Probably would have used his resources to prove Tasha was an unfit mother. Probably would have tried to control the situation the way he controlled everything else in his life. The realization made him feel sick. "I've been raising them alone," Tasha continued, her voice softer now. 3 babies in the NICU for weeks. 3 toddlers learning to walk at the same time. 3 children who needed everything and I had nothing. This farm saved us. This place gave us a home when I thought we'd end up on the streets." Kevin looked around at the thriving farm, at the neat cottage, at the evidence of years of hard work. "You did all this yourself? What choice did I have?" They stood there in silence, 4 years of hurt and anger and missed chances between them. Kevin's mind was spinning. He had children, 3 of them. They were healthy and happy and beautiful. And they didn't know him, didn't know he existed. "What are their names?" Kevin asked quietly. Tasha hesitated, like even giving him this information was dangerous. Finally, she said, "James, Julia, and Jacob. All J names, like his name." Kevin felt something crack in his chest. She'd given them names that connected to him, even when she thought he'd never know them. "I want to meet them," Kevin said. "Properly." "Kevin, they're my children, Tasha. I've already lost 3.5 years. Please, don't take any more time from me." Tasha looked at him for a long moment. Then she sighed, and Kevin saw how tired she looked. How heavy this burden must have been, carrying it alone for so long. "Fine," she said. "But on my terms, slowly, carefully. Their well-being comes first, before your feelings, before mine, before everything. Can you agree to that?" Kevin wanted to argue, wanted to say he had rights, wanted to demand immediate custody and weekends and everything he'd missed. But he looked at Tasha's face and saw she was serious. Push too hard and she'd shut him out completely. He'd lose whatever chance he had. "I agree," he said. "Your terms." Tasha nodded slowly. "Tomorrow. Come back tomorrow afternoon. I'll introduce you as a friend. We'll see how they react. And Kevin, if you hurt them, if you promise them something and don't deliver, if you disrupt their lives just to make yourself feel better, I will make sure you never see them again. Legal or not, do you understand?" "I understand." "Good. Now leave. I need to talk to them before tomorrow." Kevin wanted to stay, wanted to go to that cottage and meet his children right now. But he'd already lost them once by pushing. He wouldn't lose them again. He walked back to his car on shaky legs. Before he drove away, he looked back once. Tasha was still standing in the garden watching him, and in the cottage window, 3 small faces were pressed against the glass, staring at the strange man who'd made their mother cry. Kevin's children, his family, and he hadn't even known they existed. The drive back to the city was the longest 2 hours of his life. Kevin didn't sleep that night. He lay in his king-sized bed in his penthouse apartment, staring at the ceiling, his mind replaying the moment he'd seen those three little faces, his children. He had children. The words felt impossible even as he repeated them over and over. At 3 a.m, he gave up on sleep and went to his home office. He pulled out his phone and looked at the photos he'd secretly taken before leaving the farm. Just distant shots of the cottage, the gardens, but if he zoomed in, he could see the children's faces in the window. James, Julia, and Jacob. He studied their features like he was memorizing them for a test. James seemed more serious, watching everything carefully. Julia had been the one pointing at things, talking. Jacob was the one who'd waved at Kevin before Tasha pulled them away from the window. 3 different personalities already, and he knew nothing about them. Didn't know their favorite colors or foods, or if they were scared of the dark. Didn't know which one woke up first, or who was the troublemaker, or which one needed the most hugs. Kevin felt the weight of 3.5 years pressing on his chest. All those moments gone. First smiles, first words, first everything. And he'd missed it all because he'd been too proud and hurt to let Tasha contact him when she'd tried. Because she had tried. That's what ate at him. In his anger after the divorce, he'd built walls so high that his own children couldn't reach him. Tasha had called 12 times, sent emails, came to his building, and he'd blocked every attempt because he wanted to hurt her the way she'd hurt him by leaving. Except she'd left because he'd failed her, failed to stand up to his mother, failed to protect her from racist comments disguised as concern, failed to make her feel like she mattered more than keeping peace with his family. Kevin had spent 4 years telling himself he was the victim. Now he was seeing the truth, and it was ugly. His mother. Kevin looked at his phone, then at the clock. Too early to call. But this conversation was coming. His mother needed to know she had grandchildren. Grandchildren she'd never meet if Kevin didn't figure out how to fix the mess he'd made. The next afternoon, Kevin drove back upstate. He'd spent the morning canceling meetings and ignoring his assistant's confused questions about why his schedule was suddenly empty. Nothing mattered except getting back to that farm. Getting to his children. He'd bought gifts. He couldn't help himself. A teddy bear, 2 toy trucks, a doll. But as he pulled up to the farm, he remembered Tasha's rules. No expensive gifts, nothing that would overwhelm them. Kevin left the toys in his trunk, feeling foolish. He was a billionaire who couldn't even buy his own kids presents. What kind of father was that? Tasha was waiting on the cottage porch. She looked like she hadn't slept either. Her eyes were puffy, and she had that exhausted look of someone who'd cried too much. Kevin felt guilt twist in his stomach. He'd done that. His presence here was ripping open old wounds. "Are you sure about this?" Kevin asked as he approached. "I can wait if you need more time." "They've been asking about the man from yesterday all morning," Tasha said. "Jacob thinks you're a cowboy because you were wearing boots. Julia thinks you might be a prince because you have a fancy car. James hasn't said much, but he keeps drawing pictures of you. Might as well get this over with." Kevin's heart clenched. They'd been thinking about him, drawing pictures, making up stories about who he might be. "What did you tell them?" "The truth. Sort of. I said you're an old friend who's going to visit sometimes, that you're a good person who I used to know before they were born." Tasha paused. "I didn't tell them you're their father. Not yet. They need to get to know you first. Trust you. Then we can explain." Kevin wanted to argue. Wanted to say they deserved to know the truth. But looking at Tasha's tired face, he realized she was protecting them. If Kevin disappointed them, if he proved unreliable, it would hurt less if they thought he was just a family friend. Smart, practical, and painful as hell. "Okay," Kevin agreed. "Whatever you think is best." Tasha looked surprised, like she'd expected a fight. "Really? You're not going to argue?" "I'm trying to learn from my mistakes," Kevin said quietly. "I didn't listen to you during our marriage. I'm listening now." Something shifted in Tasha's expression. Not forgiveness, not yet, but maybe a crack in the armor. "They're inside, ready?" Kevin wasn't ready, would never be ready. but he nodded anyway. The cottage was smaller than Kevin expected, but cozy. Sunlight streamed through windows onto wooden floors. Children's drawings covered the refrigerator. Toys were scattered around, but not in a messy way, more like they'd been played with and would be played with again. It felt like a home. A real home with warmth and life, so different from his sterile apartment with its expensive furniture that no one was allowed to touch. 3 small faces peeked around the corner from what looked like a living room. Julia was the brave one. She came out first, her curly hair bouncing, wearing overalls with dirt stains on the knees. "Hi, are you the cowboy?" Kevin's throat closed up. His daughter. This was his daughter, talking to him with bright eyes and no fear. "I'm not a cowboy," he managed to say, "but I do like horses. We have chickens," Julia announced proudly. "I can show you if you want." I named them all. "That one's Princess, and that one's Sparkle, and that one's—" "Julia, let him come inside first," Tasha said gently. She looked at Kevin. "Sorry, she's very talkative." "Don't apologize," Kevin said. "I want to hear about all the chickens." Julia beamed and grabbed his hand without hesitation. Her small fingers wrapped around 2 of his, and Kevin felt something in his chest crack open. This was real. She was real. He had a daughter who wanted to tell him about chickens named Princess and Sparkle. The boys were more cautious. Jacob stayed in the doorway, watching with curious eyes. James hung back completely, his expression serious and evaluating. Kevin recognized that look. It was the same way Kevin approached new business deals, careful and analytical. His son had inherited that. "Those are my brothers," Julia said, still holding Kevin's hand. "That's Jacob and that's James. Jacob likes to build stuff and James likes books. I like animals best." "Those are all good things to like," Kevin said. He looked at the boys. "Hi, Jacob. Hi, James," Jacob waved shyly. James just nodded, still watching Kevin like he was trying to figure out a puzzle. Tasha suggested they all sit in the living room. It was clearly the heart of the home. Books everywhere, blankets draped over a worn couch, a basket full of building blocks in the corner. Kevin sat carefully in an armchair while the children settled on the couch with Tasha between them. A united front. Them and Tasha on one side, Kevin on the other. "So," Tasha said, "Kevin is going to visit us sometimes. He's interested in learning about the farm. Maybe you could show him around." "Can he see my fort?" Jacob asked, speaking for the first time. His voice was soft, almost a whisper. "If he wants to," Tasha said. "I'd love to see your fort," Kevin said quickly. "Did you build it yourself?" Jacob nodded proudly. "With Mama's help. It's in the barn." "He's really good at building," Julia added. "Better than me. I accidentally knocked it down once and he cried, but then I helped him fix it, and now it's even better." Kevin watched them interact. The easy way they finished each other's thoughts and touched each other's arms. Triplets. They'd been together since before they were born, sharing everything. He was the outsider here, the stranger in their established world. James finally spoke, his voice clear and direct. "Why do you want to learn about our farm?" Tasha tensed slightly. Kevin understood why. This was the smart one, the one who'd ask difficult questions. "I'm interested in how things grow," Kevin said carefully. "I've lived in cities my whole life. I don't know much about farming or animals or any of this. Your mom has built something special here, and I'd like to understand it better." "Do you have kids?" James asked. The question hung in the air. Kevin's eyes met Tasha's. She gave a tiny shake of her head. "Not yet." "Don't tell them yet, no," Kevin said, the lie tasting bitter. "But I hope to spend time with some pretty special kids while I'm visiting here." James seemed to accept this, though his eyes stayed watchful. After a few more minutes of careful conversation, Julia grabbed Kevin's hand again. "Come on, I'll show you the chickens now." The next 2 hours were surreal. Kevin followed his children around the farm, learning about chickens and goats in the vegetable garden. Julia narrated everything, her voice never stopping. Jacob showed him the fort in the barn, a complex structure made from hay bales and old wood that was actually impressive for a 3-year-old. James stayed close to Tasha, but occasionally added facts, clearly the family encyclopedia. Kevin learned that Julia was scared of spiders but loved worms, that Jacob had built 17 different forts this year, that James could already read some words and was teaching himself the others. Each small detail felt precious, a glimpse into the lives he'd missed. When the sun started setting, Tasha said it was time for Kevin to go. The children protested, especially Julia, who'd attached herself to Kevin's leg. "But he didn't see my drawings yet." "He can see them next time he visits," Tasha said firmly. "When's next time?" Julia demanded. Kevin looked at Tasha, waiting for her answer. This was her call. "Maybe Saturday," she said. "If Kevin's free." "I'm free," Kevin said immediately. "I'll be here." He drove home in a daze. He'd touched his children, talked to them, heard them laugh. Julia had hugged him goodbye, just threw her arms around his legs like it was nothing. Like he was already part of her world. Jacob had waved shyly from the porch. James had said, "See you Saturday," which felt like a massive victory. But Kevin also saw what he'd missed. 3.5 years of Julia's stories and Jacob's forts and James's serious observations. Tasha doing it all alone, working the farm and raising triplets and being everything they needed because Kevin hadn't been there. He called his lawyer as soon as he got home. "I need you to look into something. Can a mother keep children from their father if he was unreachable during the pregnancy?" His lawyer asked questions. Kevin explained the situation, leaving out the part about how it was his own fault. The lawyer was quiet for a moment. "Legally, you have rights as the father, but it's complicated if she made genuine attempts to contact you and you blocked her. A court would look at that. They'd also look at the children's current situation. If they're thriving, if there's no abuse or neglect, most judges won't want to disrupt that unnecessarily. So what do I do? Work with her. Don't make this adversarial. Establish a relationship with the kids first. Prove you're reliable. Then discuss legal custody arrangements. Going in aggressive would hurt your case and hurt the kids." Kevin thanked him and hung up. He didn't want to go in aggressive anyway. He wanted his children to love him, not resent him for fighting their mother. But there was another problem. A bigger problem. Kevin pulled up the files on the farm development. Construction was supposed to start in 6 weeks. The resort had investors lined up, contracts signed. The farm and cottage would be demolished to make room for luxury cabins and a spa. He'd been planning to evict Tasha and his children. Bulldoze their home. Kevin felt sick. He grabbed his phone and called his property manager. "That upstate farm property. I need to put the development on hold." "What? Why?" "We're about to break ground. The investors," I said, "put it on hold. I'll deal with the investors." "Kevin, this will cost us millions. There are penalties for backing out now." "I know. Put it on hold anyway. I need time to figure something out." He hung up before his manager could argue more. Then he sat in his office staring at blueprints for a resort that would destroy the only home his children had ever known. A resort he'd approved without even visiting the property first. Without knowing or caring who lived there, this was who he was. Someone who made decisions based on profit without thinking about the people affected. Someone who'd inherited his father's business sense and his mother's cold calculation. Someone who'd lost his wife because he couldn't stand up to his family, and now was about to lose his children for the same weakness. His phone rang. His mother. Kevin stared at her name on the screen, debating whether to answer. Finally, he picked up. "Kevin, darling, I haven't heard from you in weeks. Are you coming to the charity gala next month?" "Mom, I need to tell you something." "What is it?" "You sound strange." Kevin took a breath. "I have children, triplets, 3.5 years old." Silence on the line. Then, "What are you talking about? Is this a joke?" "Tasha was pregnant when we divorced. She tried to tell me, but I'd blocked her from contacting me. I just found out yesterday." More silence. Kevin could hear his mother processing this. Finally, she said, "Where is she now? Do you have custody? We should talk to the lawyers immediately about establishing your rights. She's been raising them on her own. They're happy and healthy. I'm not taking them from her." "Kevin, be reasonable. She kept your children from you. You can't let that stand. You have resources. Use them." "She tried to tell me," Kevin said, his voice harder. "I was the one who made it impossible for her to reach me. Because I was angry. Because you'd convinced me she was the problem in our marriage when really, Mom, you were the problem. How dare you? You treated her horribly. You said racist things at every family dinner. You offered her money to leave me." "Yes, I found out about that, and I did nothing. I let you push away the woman I loved because I was too much of a coward to stand up to you." His mother's voice turned icy. "I did what was best for this family. That woman was completely unsuitable. She had no breeding, no class, no understanding of our world." "Our world," Kevin repeated bitterly. "You mean our money? That's all you care about?" "Well, I don't care about it anymore. I have 3 children who've been living on a farm, covered in dirt, happier than I've ever been in my life. And they're more important than all the money and class and breeding you value so much. You're being emotional and foolish. Maybe. But I'm done letting you run my life. I'm done choosing your approval over the people I love. You will not meet my children until you can treat their mother with respect. And if you can't do that, then you won't meet them at all. Kevin hung up before she could respond. His hands were shaking. He'd never stood up to his mother like that. Never chosen anyone over her. It felt terrifying and liberating at the same time. His phone buzzed with a text from Tasha. The kids had fun today. Julia hasn't stopped talking about you. James drew 3 more pictures. Jacob asked if you could help him build a bigger fort next time. See you Saturday. Kevin stared at that text for a long time. His children wanted to see him again. Wanted him to help build forts. Wanted him in their lives. He had a chance. A real chance to be the father they deserved. He just had to make sure he didn't destroy everything trying to control it. Just had to learn to listen, to follow Tasha's lead, to put his children first. Saturday couldn't come fast enough. Kevin showed up at the farm every Saturday for the next month. Then Saturdays and Sundays. Then he started coming on Wednesdays too, telling his office he was working remotely but really spending the afternoon helping Julia feed chickens or watching Jacob build increasingly complex structures or reading with James, who was determined to finish every children's book in the cottage. The children warmed up to him at different speeds. Julia was all in from day one, treating Kevin like he'd always been part of their lives. She'd grab his hand and drag him around the farm, chattering constantly about everything and nothing. She told him about her best friend at preschool who could do a cartwheel. About how she wanted to be a veterinarian when she grew up. About how sometimes she had bad dreams but Mama always made them better. Jacob was slower but steady. He'd show Kevin his projects, accept help building, gradually start talking more. One Sunday, Jacob asked if Kevin could stay for lunch. Tasha looked surprised but said yes. They ate grilled cheese sandwiches at a small kitchen table. The 4 of them crowded together, and Kevin felt something he hadn't felt in 4 years. Like he belonged somewhere. James remained cautious. He'd participate in activities, answer questions politely but always with this evaluating look in his eyes, like he was gathering data and hadn't reached a conclusion yet. Kevin understood. James was protecting his family, making sure the stranger was safe before fully letting him in. Smart kid. Kevin's kid. 2 months in, everything changed. Kevin was helping Jacob build a massive fort in the barn when James appeared with a book. "Can you read this to me?" he asked, holding out a picture book about space. Of course, Kevin said, surprised James was asking. They sat on a hay bale together, and Kevin read about planets and stars and astronauts. When he finished, James was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "You read it better than Mama. She always falls asleep during the boring parts." Kevin laughed. "Your Mama works really hard. She's probably tired. Are you tired?" James asked, looking up at him with those serious eyes. "Not when I'm here with you guys." James considered this. Good. Because Julia talks a lot and Jacob needs help with his forts and I have a lot of books. So you can't be tired. It was the closest thing to acceptance Kevin had gotten from James. His throat felt tight. "I promise I won't get too tired." "Okay." James paused. "Can we read another book?" They read 3 more books on that hay bale. By the 3rd one, James was leaning against Kevin's side, his small body warm and trusting. Kevin's arm came around him naturally and James didn't pull away. When Tasha came to find them for dinner, she stopped in the doorway and just stared. Kevin looked up and saw tears in her eyes. Later, after the kids were in bed, Kevin and Tasha sat on the cottage porch. It had become their routine. The children would go to sleep and they'd sit in the cooling evening air and talk. Sometimes about the kids, sometimes about the farm, sometimes carefully about their past. "James doesn't trust easily," Tasha said, staring out at the dark fields. "When he was tiny in the NICU, he had the most medical problems. He stopped breathing twice. I thought I was going to lose him. Ever since, he's been cautious about everything. Takes a long time to feel safe with people. But he trusted me today," Kevin said quietly. "Yeah." Tasha wiped her eyes. "He did." They were quiet for a while. Then Kevin said, "I need to tell you something." "About the farm." Tasha tensed. "What about it?" "I bought this property as part of a development deal. The plan was to build a luxury resort. The farm was supposed to be torn down. Construction was scheduled to start next month. Tasha stood up fast, her face going pale even in the dim light. What? I put it on hold, Kevin said quickly. As soon as I found out you were here, as soon as I met the kids, I stopped everything. You were going to destroy our home. Tasha's voice shook. While you were coming here playing dad to your kids, you were planning to bulldoze the only place they've ever lived? I didn't know you were here when I made those plans. The property was just a piece of land on paper. I never even visited until that day I saw you. As soon as I understood what this place meant to you and the kids, I stopped the development. But you made the plans first. Tasha was pacing now. You bought this property, looked at this farm where people were living and working, and decided it was worth more as a resort. You didn't care about the tenant family, didn't care about disrupting lives, just saw dollar signs. Kevin couldn't argue because it was true. He'd done exactly that. You're right. I was only thinking about profit. But I'm trying to change. I'm trying to be better. Trying? Tasha laughed bitterly. Kevin, you've been coming here for 2 months, playing with the kids, helping around the farm, acting like you care about this life we've built, and the whole time, you knew this property was supposed to be demolished. Were you just going to let it happen? Wait until the bulldozers showed up to tell us? No. I told you I stopped it. For how long? Until you get bored of playing farmer? Until being a weekend dad loses its appeal? Then what, Kevin? You fire up the development again and we're homeless? I would never do that. How do I know that? Tasha was crying now. How do I trust anything you say? You let your mother treat me like garbage for 2 years and did nothing. You blocked me from contacting you when I was pregnant and desperate. And now you're sitting here telling me you almost destroyed our home, but it's fine because you changed your mind. Why should I believe you won't change it back? Kevin stood up, wanting to comfort her, but knowing she wouldn't accept it. Because I love them, Tasha. Those kids in there are everything to me. I know I've only known them for 2 months, but they're everything. I would never hurt them. You already hurt them, Tasha shot back. They don't know it yet because they don't know you're their father. But when we tell them, when they understand you weren't there for 3.5 years, that's going to hurt. And if you're not careful, if you make promises you don't keep, if you prioritize your business over them the way you did with me, that will hurt them even more. Kevin felt like he'd been punched. She was right. About all of it. He'd been so focused on getting to know his children that he hadn't thought about what would happen when they learned the truth. How would he explain that he'd missed their entire baby years because he'd been too proud and angry to let their mother talk to him? I'm sorry, Kevin said. You're right. I've been selfish. I've been thinking about what I want instead of what's best for them. So what are you going to do about the development? Tasha asked. Because I need to know if I should start looking for a new place to live. Kevin had been thinking about this for weeks, ever since he'd called his property manager. I'm going to cancel it completely, and I'm going to deed this property to you. Tasha stared at him. What? The farm should be yours. You're the one who made it successful. You're the one who's poured your life into it. I'll transfer ownership to you, free and clear. You'll never have to worry about me taking it away. I can't afford to buy this property from you. I'm not selling it. I'm giving it to you. As an apology. As child support for the years I missed. As recognition that you've built something meaningful here and I almost destroyed it without even looking. Tasha sat down slowly on the porch step. Do you know how much money you'll lose canceling that development? Millions, Kevin admitted. There are contracts, investors, penalty fees. My board is furious, but I don't care. Some things are worth more than money. Your mother must be having a fit. I haven't spoken to my mother in 2 months, not since I told her she couldn't meet the kids unless she treated you with respect. Tasha looked up at him surprised. You stood up to your mother? I should have done it years ago. I should have done it when we were married. But better late than never, right? They sat in silence. Finally, Tasha said, I don't know if I can trust you, Kevin. I want to. For the kids' sake, I want to believe you've changed. But I've been hurt too many times, I understand. I'll prove it to you, however long it takes. You can't just throw money at this and make it better. I know. The kids are going to need consistency. You can't just show up when it's convenient and disappear when work gets busy. I won't. I've been working remotely 3 days a week. I'm planning to make it permanent. Split my time between the city and here. Tasha studied him. You'd really do that? Leave the city where all your business is? My business can happen anywhere. My kids are here. Kevin paused. And you're here. Tasha looked away quickly. Don't, we're not going there. I'm just saying I know what you're saying. But we're not a couple, Kevin. We're not getting back together. We're figuring out how to co-parent. That's it. Okay, Kevin agreed, though his chest ached. He still loved her. Probably never stopped. But she was right. They needed to focus on the children first. Everything else could wait. Over the next few weeks, Kevin made good on his promises. He hired lawyers to handle the development cancellation. It cost him $8 million in penalties and buyouts, but he didn't care. The property was transferred to Tasha's name. She cried when she signed the papers, kept saying she couldn't believe it was real. He also started spending more time at the farm. Not just weekend visits, but actual time. He rented a small house in the nearby town, close enough to be present, but not so close that he was invading Tasha's space. He learned how to actually help on the farm instead of just watching. Got his hands dirty planting vegetables, fixing fences, even mucking out the goat pen. The kids loved having him around more. Julia started asking when Kevin would be back before he'd even left. Jacob wanted to show him every new fort, every new building project. And James, cautious James, started seeking Kevin out to read together. They'd sit on the porch for hours, James choosing book after book, sometimes falling asleep against Kevin's shoulder. 3 months after Kevin first discovered his children, Tasha said it was time to tell them the truth. They were old enough to understand, and it wasn't fair to keep lying. Kevin was terrified. What if they were angry? What if they rejected him? What if knowing he was their father but hadn't been there for years made them trust him less, not more? But Tasha was right. They deserved the truth. They sat the children down one evening after dinner. All three looked confused about why this felt serious. Julia clutched her stuffed elephant. Jacob leaned against Tasha's side. James watched Kevin with those analytical eyes. Tasha took a breath. We need to tell you something important about Kevin. Is he going away? Julia asked, her voice small. No, sweetie. The opposite. Kevin is going to be part of our family forever because... She looked at Kevin and he nodded. Because Kevin is your daddy. 3 little faces processing this information. Julia spoke first. Our daddy? The one who wasn't here before? Yes, Tasha said gently. Where were you? James asked Kevin directly. Kevin swallowed hard. I didn't know about you. Your mama and I weren't together anymore when she found out she was pregnant. She tried to tell me, but I'd made it hard for her to reach me because I was angry about other things. By the time I found out about you, you were already 3 years old. But you know now, Jacob said quietly. Yes. And I'm so happy I know. You 3 are the best thing that ever happened to me. Are you going to leave again? James asked. Still cautious. Still protecting. Never, Kevin said firmly. I'm going to be here as much as you want me here. Forever. Julia climbed off the couch and came to Kevin. She looked up at him seriously. So you're my daddy? Yes, can I call you daddy? I would love that more than anything. Julia threw her arms around his neck. Hi, Daddy. Kevin held her, tears streaming down his face. Jacob came over next, more hesitant but wanting a hug too. Kevin pulled him in with his other arm. Hi, Daddy, Jacob whispered. James stayed on the couch for a long minute. Kevin waited, letting him process. Finally, James came over too. He didn't hug Kevin. He just looked at him seriously and said, If you're our daddy, you have to stay. You can't just visit sometimes. Daddy, stay. I'm staying, Kevin promised. I'm not going anywhere, James nodded slowly. Then carefully, he leaned against Kevin's side. Okay, hi, Daddy. Kevin looked at Tasha over the children's heads. She was crying too, wiping her eyes. He mouthed, thank you, and she nodded. That night changed everything. The kids started calling him Daddy naturally, like they'd been doing it their whole lives. They wanted him at bedtime, at meals, for every little thing. Julia insisted he tuck her in. Jacob wanted him to check under the bed for monsters. James wanted one more story, always one more. Kevin had never been happier, or more terrified, because now the kids knew who he was, which meant they also knew he'd been absent. And as they got older, they'd have questions. Why weren't you there when we were babies? Why did you let Mama do it alone? Why weren't you at our birth? He'd have to answer those questions someday, would have to explain his failures in a way children could understand. But for now, they just seemed happy to have a daddy. And Kevin was determined to be the best father he could possibly be. even if it meant facing the uncomfortable truth that he'd already failed them once, and the fear that he might fail them again. 6 months after Kevin first discovered his children, he thought he had everything figured out. He'd been spending 4 days a week at the farm, helping Tasha and getting to know the kids. His company hadn't collapsed despite his reduced presence. His board had adjusted to his new priorities. Life was working. He was being a father. Things were good. Then Julia got sick. It started as just a cold, a runny nose, some coughing. Tasha kept her home from preschool for a day. But that night, Julia's fever spiked to 104. She was burning up, crying that her head hurt, and nothing would bring the fever down. Tasha called Kevin at 11 at night, her voice shaking with panic. Kevin was at the cottage in 20 minutes. Julia was on the couch wrapped in blankets but shivering. Her eyes were glassy and unfocused. Kevin had never been so scared in his life. He scooped her up, blanket and all, and carried her to his car. Tasha grabbed the boys who were crying because their sister was sick and their mama was scared. The hospital was 30 minutes away. Kevin drove faster than he should have, one hand on the wheel and one hand reaching back to hold Julia's hot little hand. She kept saying "Daddy" in this small, confused voice that broke his heart into pieces. At the emergency room, Kevin used his name and resources shamelessly. Private room, best doctors, every test available. He didn't care what it cost. His daughter was sick and nothing else mattered. Tasha held Julia while the doctors examined her. The boys clung to Kevin, scared and exhausted. It was 2 a.m. before anyone told them anything. Bacterial meningitis. Serious, but they'd caught it early enough. Julia would need to stay in the hospital for at least a week on IV antibiotics. She'd be okay, but it was going to be rough. Kevin felt his knees go weak with relief. Okay. She'd be okay. That was all that mattered. They set up a rotation. Tasha stayed with Julia during the day. Kevin came in the evenings. A neighbor from the farm took the boys so Tasha didn't have to worry about childcare. The first few days were bad. Julia was in pain, couldn't keep food down, cried for her mama constantly. But slowly she improved. On day 4, Julia was finally feeling better. She was sitting up in bed watching cartoons when she asked Kevin, "Were you there when I was born?" Kevin froze. This was the question he'd been dreading. "No, sweetie. I wasn't. Why not? How did you explain adult failures to a 4-year-old? Your mama and I weren't together then, and I didn't know about you yet." Julia thought about this. Was Mama alone? Yes, that's sad. Mamas shouldn't be alone when babies are born. She paused. Were we sick when we were babies too? I don't know, Kevin admitted. And it hit him like a truck. He didn't know. Didn't know anything about their births, their first months, their struggles. Was someone sick? James, Julia said matter-of-factly. Mama talks about it sometimes when she thinks we're asleep. She says James stopped breathing and the doctors had to save him. And we were all really tiny, so we had to stay in the hospital for a long time. Kevin felt something crack in his chest. James had almost died. His son had almost died as a baby, and Kevin hadn't known. Hadn't been there. Tasha had gone through that terror alone. That evening, after Julia fell asleep, Kevin found Tasha in the hospital cafeteria. She was drinking bad coffee and looked like she hadn't slept in days. He sat down across from her. Julia told me about James, about him stopping breathing. Tasha's hand shook slightly around her coffee cup. She shouldn't have told you that. Why didn't you tell me? When would I have told you, Kevin? When you were blocking my calls? When I was in the NICU by myself, watching our son fight for his life through a plastic incubator while also worrying about the other 2 babies who were struggling too? Her voice was rising. When exactly was the right time to share that information? I'm sorry, Kevin said. I wish I'd been there. So do I, Tasha said. And Kevin heard all the exhaustion and loneliness and fear in those 3 words. Do you want to know what it was like? Giving birth to triplets at 7 months because my body couldn't handle it anymore. 3 babies, each under 4 pounds, each with their own medical crisis. James had respiratory problems. Julia had jaundice so bad she was under lights 24/7. Jacob had digestive issues and couldn't keep food down. Kevin felt tears on his face. Tasha, I was there every day for 2 months. 8 hours a day in the NICU because that's all they'd let me stay. I'd pump milk in the bathroom. Eat vending machine food. Sleep in my car in the parking lot because I couldn't afford the gas to drive home and back twice a day. And I did it alone, Kevin. Completely alone. Because their father had decided I didn't exist anymore. I didn't know you were pregnant.